Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Erica Edwards Show here on Business Takeout. And today, my guest is Mr. Realtor Toronto. Welcome, Neville. Thank you, Neville, for joining us. I was just telling Neville, you might have heard it because we're still working out the beginning of the feed, but I was just telling Neville how I loved his plant video on Instagram. So if you're not following Neville, Mr. Toronto Realtor on Instagram, you'll find him there, and he has this really cool video where he's, showing us all his new plants. So we were just talking about that. So welcome to this edition, Neville. Thank you for joining us and being willing to share all your information. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
My name, Neville Thompson. They call me Mr. Toronto Realtor. That's my branding, I guess. I'm a real estate agent, mortgage broker within the Greater Toronto area. Started doing real estate about 7 years ago now. Doing mortgage about 8 years, but I focus mainly on real estate.
Okay, so real estate, so buying, selling,
pre-construction, assignment sales, and things like that.
Okay, perfect. So obviously the topic recently has been COVID. We think maybe we're post-COVID, maybe we're in between waves, but COVID has definitely affected everything, all businesses. And so can you share a bit of how it has affected the real estate market? What has changed for you?
When COVID started, take me, for example, I had a few listings, but because of the panic and nobody really knew what COVID was, and it was just this big pandemic that came out of nowhere, a lot of sellers wouldn't allow you to go in their houses. So you'd book showings for purchasers, and they were canceling, or at the door, they'd slam the door in your face. They didn't want people in there because they have kids and COVID and they didn't want to catch it. They didn't know what to do. So a lot of people took their houses off the market, as well as a lot of purchasers said, okay, I'm going to put my purchasing off because I don't want to be out there to catch something. So we were basically just stuck.
Okay, so there was a big slowdown for you. Was that April or May that you saw that really happening?
March. Because when that whole big announcement, the shutdown and everything happened, March, April, and May. Yeah, all three of those months.
All three of those months. So in June, it picked back up, you found?
In June, it picked back up, I guess, because of COVID fatigue. A lot of people were just over it and wearing their masks and whatever. And so they just decided to go for it. They had more, when something just happens, the big shock, so that kind of wore off. It's still there, but things start to pick up. People are willing to go out again and, I guess, take that risk.
Well, I really like that COVID fatigue. Last week we had the COVID-15 that people had gained 15 pounds, but COVID fatigue. And I think that's really real. As Canadians, we are pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? We're pretty compliant, I think. But even here in Toronto, like you said, I think a lot of people experienced that fatigue where they were just over it. They were tired of it. They were tired of staying inside. And so people started to come out again. So houses went back on the market. People were opening back their doors and putting their houses back up. How did you deal with that slowdown? How did you deal with the transition? Did you think about changing what you were doing at all?
Well, with me, I've always done a variety of things other than real estate. So real estate basically got put on the back burner in a sense, but I still had to groom certain clients. With COVID, there's a lot of things I was able to do with clients that wasn't necessarily possible before COVID, which we can get into with the advantages afterwards when you're ready for that. So it was just a matter of focusing on, say, the stock market, buying up everything that was quote unquote on sale, as well as just grooming clients within that period of time.
So actually that was what I wanted to ask you. So when we connected before this interview, one of the things you mentioned were the advantages and the disadvantages of buying and selling during COVID. And I'm very interested to know, what I'm going to start with the thing that makes me more curious is what are the advantages of selling or buying during a time like this?
Okay, let's start with buying. So buying during COVID, usually a client comes to me and usually you got to have your mortgage in place and things like that, right, to see what you qualify for. Then you got to pull your credit. You pull your credit, you see a cell bill from 1999, right, in collections that you had no idea about. If you go to the banks prior to COVID, they're not even looking at you. You got to deal with that, or you got to go to a B bank and higher interest rates and things like that. So, and then, or fight it out with the creditor or the credit bureau or both. So now with COVID, because everybody's all scrambling, the banks are scrambling, retailers are scrambling, all those things on your credit bureau, even if they are yours, like say that $50 phone billing collection is yours, that car payment in collection is yours. You can contact the credit bureau, which you could from before. They contact the creditors. If the creditors don't respond within 30 days, that gets removed off your credit. It gets removed, your credit score goes up. So because of COVID, a lot of companies didn't have time to get back to the credit bureau because either they weren't in the office or they just were dealing and scrambling with different things. So you can test that on your credit bureau, it gets bumped off. I've done that with a lot of my clients and their scores go from maybe low 6s to almost 7. And that can change how the banks look at you and your interest rate.
Wow. Okay. So one of the advantages then of buying during COVID was that because so many people were scrambling, so many businesses are scrambling, something like getting back to our 2 credit reporting agencies was not a priority. They let that slide. And what that did was help people bump up points. So that's very interesting. Would you say, Neville, that that's still in effect right now? Like, are people back on track, or do you think that businesses are still reeling from the whole, what happened in March?
I think businesses aren't scrambling as much, but because a lot of businesses are transitioning to a big percentage of their companies, of their employees working from home, you can still get away with it. I've had a client just the other day still deal with it because clients are working at home. They don't have their boss or the supervisor hovering over the back of their head. So those things get missed. And during the transition, they're focusing on just the core part of their business rather than then the accounts receivable and things like that. So it's still possible, and it's still happening now. What I just said in those points, you can still do it now.
That is definitely a reason to kind of get your ducks in a row and see what you can clean up during this time. So that was one of the advantages of buying, you were saying. Now, as a seller, what would an advantage be?
As a seller, I wouldn't really say there's much advantages as a seller, because as a seller, what had happened to one of my clients, for example, they list the house for a certain price and then COVID hit. COVID hit now, and a lot of people had this doomsday mentality that the world is going to end. So they had put in an offer to my client, like let's use fictitious numbers. Like say they put in an offer for $500,000 for the condo, and everything was good to go. They had a 5-day mortgage condition. On the 5th day, they come back and go, they amended it saying mortgage is approved, but you got to reduce the price to $470,000. And I'm like, under what reasoning? Oh, well, it's COVID. You never know what's going to happen. You might not be able to sell it next year, and you might not be able to this. Obviously, my client rejected it, but that's what happens to sellers. As well as with COVID, as a seller, which is an advantage to the purchaser, there's many ways, there's many loopholes and ways out. So your financing condition, you have 5 days to get your financing in a row. With COVID, you could always say, okay, the bank didn't get back to me. I couldn't go into the bank. I couldn't do this. You could have a 20-day financing condition. So you have time, a lot more time to work out things as a purchaser. As a seller, you're sitting there, you think your house is sold, but you got to wait until the buyer in the bank feels they want to do it. They can bail out, they can back out, and COVID is always the excuse.
Okay,
so there was no advantages really.
Okay, so for the seller, there was none. Now, disadvantages. What were the disadvantages for buyers and sellers in the market during this time?
The disadvantage for buyers and sellers during this time in the beginning is you couldn't show anything, right? So that the sellers is pure disadvantage because your price could get slashed. You don't know if you're going to get it sold. The banks could come back and say no. The banks weren't approving anything. But for the purchasers, again, the credit is a good thing. Buying, the interest rates were really low. So you could buy and have an interest rate of 1.8% versus what we thought was low prior to COVID, which was 2.9.
Wow.
Right. So the interest rates are very, very cheap. So what else? Another advantage to the buyer, that's pretty much it. You had flexibility to figure things out while you go through the process, and the seller just had to wait on you.
Okay, so really during COVID, then you would say that it worked more in favor of the buyer than the seller.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so now have the numbers turn around, Neville. Now that we're in September, it seems like September's just blazing by. I think there's a lot of confusion, with things reopening here in Toronto. I believe we're still in the third phase of reopening. Children entering back school, some are, some aren't, parents trying to figure out work. So, but in the real estate market, do you see that it's returned to like a normalcy, that a normal level that you saw prior to COVID?
It has returned. I wouldn't say a normal level. It is beyond a normal level.
Wow. Okay.
If normal was say 10, it went from 0 to 20.
Wow.
And I feel it's because, one, the interest rates are lower, so everybody's like, okay, let me buy what I can buy now.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, because people are at home and they're home with their kids and they're home with their family, they're home with their significant other, they need more space.
They realize they need a bigger home.
they realize they need a bigger home because, again, Amazon stocks have gone through the roof. They're buying all kinds of stuff. They need a bigger space. Interest rates are cheap and this and that. They're home and it's like, okay, let me go look at another house. They're browsing on the internet, seeing other houses. So clients are just beating down your doors now to go purchase something.
So, I'm going to ask you to make a bit of a guess here. I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball. But considering, obviously, COVID had a worldwide effect. It was not just Canada or the United States. It was everyone in the world was affected by this in some way. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are saying they think that it will have a very long-term impact on how business is done in general, even in terms of schooling. Now, in your opinion, Neville, looking in your own personal crystal ball, so we won't hold you to this, do you think that COVID has changed the way we live enough that people will be working, learning, and living in their homes more? Because Toronto is notorious for being, like many big cities, being a commuter city where people, in order to even be able to afford a home, our American friends that are watching that heard him say $500,000 for the condo, those numbers are really real. Like, that's serious and that's cheap.
Those numbers are more than real.
They're really, but a lot of my American friends are like, I don't understand. I just bought a house for $289. I'm like, no, that does not happen.
And then add about 10-15%. We're worse than Manhattan right now.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just very different. So what I'm asking you is, considering how much COVID at that time changed everything, do you feel that will be long-term? Do you see more people will be working from home long-term? Do you think more children will be homeschooled and that will just lead to people as in the future getting bigger homes? Or do you think that was just a temporary change?
I think it's here to stay for a few reasons. One, businesses have realized they don't need to be, the bosses and stuff don't need to be over your shoulder to get things done. Everybody was stuck on this old-fashioned way. They got to be in the office, they got to be in front of your eyes. And COVID forced them to have people at home, and they realized they're just as productive without the brick and mortar. Even if they're only 80% productive, you're saving millions of dollars not having a lease. Shopify has basically turned all of their offices into home-based employees now. They've gotten rid of all that brick and mortar. And I feel people have become, with COVID, they become more mindful. They now think of, okay, what am I doing with my money? If the world was going to end, I have nothing, and this and that, whatever. So a lot of people, that's another reason why sales have gone up, because they've become more conscious of their spending and become more active as to what they want to do with their lives. And they've also realized with their jobs being slashed or getting served that they got to do more than one thing.
Right. Yeah, so definitely.
Capitalizing off of Instagram, capitalizing off of YouTube, capitalizing off of a variety of different things whilst doing their core 9-to-5 or their core business.
Right. I agree with you there. I think the same thing. I think a lot of businesses, and it's interesting what you said about even at 80% productivity, the savings they have on the other end would make it worth it for them. And I know that for want of a better way to put it, the more intelligent of the bunch have realized that I have this opportunity to work from home. So if I can keep my productivity at the same level, they can't make me come back into the office. Like when they say, okay, come back, I could say, why? I've done exactly the same thing from where I am, and I save gas, I save time, all of that. And us also too being Canadian, you've got several months a year where we just really rather not travel, right? So I think even with homeschooling, at first, a lot of parents were blindsided. They were looking at their kids like, what the heck am I going to do with you? But a lot of people adjusted. And I actually have a few colleagues and friends that I know that have just switched to homeschooling. They were like, well, you know, they kind of stuck us with the kids and we said, oh, this is not so bad. And they went with it. So I agree with you. I think that we'll see a lot of long-term change. And as you said, it was being done the old-fashioned way. Technology moves so quickly now. Our world changes so quickly. And I think that the whole COVID situation was a jolt for a lot of people to kind of catch up, because the changes are here to stay. Well, thank you for that insight into the Toronto market specifically. We are located in Toronto. So for you international watchers, yes, I know some of the numbers he threw out may sound a little crazy, but he was actually being conservative and quite nice, because I live 45 minutes away from Toronto and the condos here go for about $620.
I just sold a condo the other day, which is about 600 square feet.
Stop that.
And that went for $418.
Stop that. What do you do with 600 square feet? Where are you, what?
Yeah, 600 square feet, basically the size of a large master bedroom.
I was just about to say, it might be my room. Wow. Yes. Well, the condo that was for sale down the street from me was 1,100 square feet, which is about the same size as my apartment. And it was going for $625. Yeah. And as I said, I'm about half an hour, 40 minutes away from Toronto. So now, Neville, what I'd like to touch on, because here on Business Takeout, obviously it's about business. We want that information. We love speaking to our experts, but every business person has a heart and every business person has a passion. And if you're lucky, your passion is your business, but we also have other things. And one of the things I came to find out that you do care about is the Black Lives Matter movement and how that affects us as buyers. So we want to talk a bit about how the Black Lives Matter movement, how it impacts ownership, or how it can impact ownership. And then also too, what we started talking about earlier, which was reparations. So let's start out with how would the Black Lives Matter movement have any impact on ownership, on home ownership?
Well, the way I see it is, again, slavery, racism, and all that has gone on for years. The people that enslaved us have a 400-year head start. They basically created the system and have a head start with the system, and we're playing within their system. And me or you as an individual going and saying, counteracting the system, they'll just brush you off and ignore you. With the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, because the masses, the unity was there, it forced the powers that be to take down, say, those statues of those slave owners and all that. It forced them to change the names of streets. It forced them to make actual changes, right? And that was only possible because of unity. United we stand, divided we fall. They've been keeping us divided for so long that they didn't have to change anything. One individual speaks out, they squash you. But now with the masses, in numbers, they can't stop you, and they're making these changes, which they should have made years ago. They're only doing it now because of the numbers, and it looks bad on them. And those numbers will reflect on their sales. So the reason why I say the Black Lives Matter movement would help us in real estate, we got to take that example. A lot of people are saying that, okay, I've spoken to a lot of clients that, oh, I'm not buying a house unless I can buy it by myself. And when you look at, say, the East Indian community and the Chinese Asian community, they own various parts of the GTA because they've worked together in unity. The Black Lives Matter movement shows us that we can do the same. For example, if you want to buy a house by yourself for $500,000, use that number since we've been talking about, you got to come up with a minimum of $25,000. Say you only have $10,000 saved up and you got to save another 15. A lot of people say, oh, I'm going to wait till next year and save up that difference. While you're sitting there waiting for that year to save $15,000, that saved $500,000 house went up to $600,000. So you're basically costing yourself $85,000. So I tell people, unite. You can unite with a friend, even an enemy. You don't even have to like the person. Because if you and me hated each other and we come together and put up $25,000, you go to the lawyer, spend $2,000 on a contract. A year later, when it goes up 100 grand, you can sell it. You get your initial investment back plus $50,000 each. You can go your separate ways. You don't have to worry about liking the person because it's not a cell phone where they can put in their pocket and disappear. The house will always be there. As long as you have the legals in place, buy that with anybody.
I love it. That is an amazing concept. And I love the way that you spoke about it. Really, we don't have to love each other. We don't even have to be related. It doesn't need to be a love situation. I saw an article that was circulating widely about two single moms that had said, you know what, let's just get a house together because I'm alone, you're alone, let's do this. I also have heard a story here in the GTA of a group of young men, I think it was like 6 of them, that all put together and they bought a home. And something interesting you said, like, you know, here in the GTA, you have areas of Toronto that are owned by certain ethnic groups, you know, and the names of the areas will even change based on the ethnic groups that own them. And I actually got to see in my hometown, because I'm from Montreal, I got to see in real time, it actually happened. So the area that I lived in was it was owned by Italians. So all the homes are owned by Italians, and a lot of English speaking Caribbeans rented from them. Then over the course of the years, as I grew up there, again, the Black population still being the renters, the Italian population being the owners, we watched their children leave the duplexes, so the rental income properties, move to single family homes further off the island and rent those places out. Then there was a wave of East Indian immigrants. And literally, Neville, within 10 to 12 years, they bought whole blocks. Like they owned whole streets to the point that they owned one end of LaSalle, like they systematically bought up all the houses on the street and built a temple at the end of the street. So I got to watch in real time a different demographic come in. And again, a lot of the English speaking West Indians have been there since the 60s and 70s, still renting. Like you said, wanting to do it on their own. And I feel that divisional mentality is something that was instilled in us. I don't think it is natural to us as a people. I think it's something that was instilled in us. And I watched the whole city change into almost predominantly East Indian community. And it happened in less than 15 years. And like you said, you had a lot of people that were living together. So, you know, you have Black people renting down the street, laughing at the 9 Indians living in the house. But then within 2 years, those 9 Indians own 9 houses.
Exactly. And that is the reparations I'm speaking of. Because once they start to buy the 9 houses and multiply and buy the whole community, they can change the name of that street. They can petition for that. They can build the temple they want. They can do whatever. So
ownership.
Back and waiting, if you're United States, waiting for your, say, 40 acres and a mule, they're not giving it to you. They'll find every loophole because they created the system to not give it to you. So the system is, they designed it for individuals to not succeed. You have to unite. That's what I'm saying. As a group, you don't have to like the person. You do that, and then you can build from there. Then with the power of beating the system, you can claw back what you want, because you can now demand things. Just like, say, in Brampton here in the GTA, the Indian community can demand whatever they want. Anything
they want. They could tell them anything they want, and they will just have to comply because they own so much of the area. Wow, Neville, that is really interesting. And I think it takes a mindset shift, but as you said, I think COVID gives us this opportunity. And I was interested when you said, how can we get reparations through unity? And I was like, so should we unify and petition? But you're saying, buy it on your own, get that power and turn that into political power, financial power, and influence in the cities in which we live.
Protest through finance. When I say protest through finance, group together, buy houses. The more you group together, the less money you got to borrow from the bank. Group together and give out loans. While the bank and the second mortgages and private mortgages are charging 20%, you can undercut and charge 15%. With real estate, it's not a matter of somebody running off with your money. The house is there as equity, as collateral, sorry. And they can't run off. You just got to make sure your paperwork is in place. So if you protest through finance and lend money with legal documents, unite and buy and purchase property, then there's no stopping you.
Wow. You're absolutely right, because I really was curious as to how we could get reparations for unity. And I agree with you. I feel that that's never coming. There's never going to be a check cut. It's not going to happen. And especially as so many years have gone on and now they can split hairs. How long have you been here? And you have some of us who are of Caribbean descent. So we're first and second generation Canadians. So they might turn around and say, well, maybe England owes you the money, or I don't see that ever happening. And I think that you're right in that as a community, we have to build and get stronger in order to be able to demand things and look for change and so forth. So in closing, first of all, how do we reach you? How do they find you? If they decide you are the real estate guy and you're the man for them, how can people find you?
You can find me a variety of ways. You can find me at my website, MrTorontoRealtor.com, Instagram, Mr. Toronto Realtor, Facebook, same thing, or just my name, Neville Thompson. You can find me pretty much anywhere. My phone number, type me into Google, I'm there. You can find me.
Okay, awesome. And also too, so what would you, if you were to leave us with a thought, if you wanted to summarize this interview, what would you like to leave us with? What advice or what statement would you like to put out there?
United we stand, divided we fall. Period.
I agree 100%. I think that if we get together and really put aside liking, disliking, get the paperwork in order, realize these are assets that, like you said, even if the person defaults, the house is there. You can get it back. It's not like a sue where somebody collects their part and they run off and you can't get it back. We're working in bigger things now. And for some of our young people to look to be lenders, and for some of our people to look to be housing developers, because it is very possible. And I feel that this moment in time is giving us many opportunities if we look at it the right way.
Exactly. I say for everybody, start with your credit. Pull your credit, contact me. If you don't mind me taking a look at it, I can show you where to start from there.
Okay, so you will help with credit repair then?
Yes.
Okay, so that is another service that you provide.
Yes.
Amazing. So like you said, we can contact you. You're Mr. Toronto Realtor, Instagram, Facebook, Google him. His number will show up. And so if you're looking to buy property in the GTA, sell your property in the GTA, need some advice, or if you want to position yourself to be able to get property in the GTA, and obviously Neville has the mindset where he will be willing to take those 10 people who want to buy that one property and make it happen.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Neville, thank you so much for your time. This was very enlightening. It was very informative. And I will, we were talking earlier too about, there was an announcement here today in Canada that there are some loans being given out. We were a little bit unclear about the numbers and so forth, but I will look for an article and post it under this interview. So here at Business Takeout and the Erica Edwards Show, we thank you so much for joining us. Neville, thank you for your time and your expertise. And I do look forward to speaking to you again.
No problem. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.